All right. So first, we'll start with a concept of parallel testing, and then we will move forward. So basically, the for parallel testing is nothing but what we can run the test parallelly. We can run the test parallelly. So by default, Playwright will run the test parallelly. So because if you go back to the Playwright config.ts file, so there is a parameter which is already configured. So by default, this fully parallel is equal to true. The value of fully parallel equal to true. So when I set this option is by default. So when I set this option, so by default, all the tests will be executed in parallel mode. Okay. So we can also make it as serial mode, and we can also make specific test parallel. If you have a, let's say I have a different files, let's say I have a different 10 spec files are there, but I don't want to run every file test or parallel. So some of them I want to run serial, some of them I want to run parallel. So we can do many configurations. And another thing is there is a concept of workers. So what is the worker means? For every process, it will assign some worker. For example, if you run one single test, the worker will be assigned to the particular test. Let us say if you are running 5 different tests, the 5 workers will be allocated to the 5 different tests. And the allocation of workers is possible only in the parallel testing. So when you run the test serial mode, one worker is enough to run all the tests, because in the serial execution, test will be executed one after another, right? Only one worker is supported for serial execution. But when you do parallel execution, so you can increase the number of workers. Let us say if you have a 5 different tests you are running, and 5 workers by default are allocated. And suppose if you want to run 5 tests with 3 different workers, you can run it. Only in the parallel mode, setting the workers information is possible. Okay, so I will show you all the option one after another. So first let us start with the serial executions. How many ways we can set options and how many ways we can specify the number of workers and so on. So first let us start with the serial mode execution. So to make it a serial mode of execution, but before that, let me start writing a simple test so that we can see all the other options. And I'm creating a new file. I'll name it as paralleltesting.spec.ts. Okay, and inside this, I'm writing a simple test. I'm not going to write any web test here. I'm just writing a few number of tests. And whenever I write a few number of tests, better to keep inside the describe block. So I just put the describe block, and inside the describe, I have written number of tests. Even if you don't specify the describe, it's not a problem. So I'm just trying to import. I'm not using any expert or anything. I'm just using only test. So I can just import only test from Playwright / test. Okay. So here, this is my describe. I'm just save only one group, and which contains a number of tests. So currently how many tests we have created here is totally 5 tests we have created. So here, this is one test, second, third, fourth, 5. So totally 5 tests I have created in this. So if I go back to the configuration file, as of now, fully parallel equal to true. This is the default option. Now to make it false, then it will become serial execution. So I'm just making false. So whenever you're making fully parallel false, right? So number of workers is by default 1. So only in the parallel testing, we can increase this number or decrease this number. But for serial execution, the worker is always 1. Okay. So now I say fully parallel equal to false. So through configuration file, I have set this workers also. Now we can go back to the test and run the test. Okay, so now it will go to serial execution. So I'm just running the test. So npx playwright test, and inside the test, parallel testing dot spec dot ts. Because I'm not created any web actions, so I'm just running in the headless mode itself. So when you run the test, so I think that the problem is in the configured properties file. So in yesterday class, we just enable these options. for grep command. So because it is filtering the test based on the tag. So with this tag, it could not find any tests. So that is the reason we are getting this error. So I just disable this, I commented. Now let us start writing the tests. Okay, now, so let me just try to write some of the tests and see how exactly it is going to work. All right, so now I have written some describe block and which contains a 5 different number of tests. So now when I execute this, by default, it will execute in parallel mode, because if you go back and see playwright.config.ts, so we by default, we set parallel equal to true. So when I run this, it will run all the tests parallel mode. So 5 tests I'm running. And if I look at the execution also, first test 1 executed, then test 3, 2, 4, 5. So basically it will follow in parallel mode. So if you want to make it as a serial mode, so you can just make it as a false. And by default, number of workers will be only 1 for serial mode. So you can just run it once again. So this will run in serial mode. So now you can see in exact order, because it is run the test in the serial mode, test 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. And this is one option which we have. So through configuration file, we can configure whether it is serial or parallel. So make sure if you're running through serial, the worker will be 1. And if you run through parallel, the workers can be multiple. Okay. So let's make it as a serial now. So to make it as a serial, I make it fully parallel equal to false. And then number of workers by default, at least 1 should be there. Okay. And through configuration file, we can do like that. And suppose if we want to configure this inside the test, and whatever configuration we have done here, this is global configuration applicable for all the tests. Now, if you want to run only test parallel, only specific file test, for example, say here, this is one single file. Now I want to run only these tests parallel. Then instead of doing configuration here, we can do configuration inside the test. So for example, here fully parallel, I'm just commenting this. Even number of workers, you can make 1 or more than 1. So as of now, the number of workers here is 1 is defined. And this is for CA environment. So if you want to add your own workers in the local environments, especially, you can just do like this, workers colon, and here you can specify how many number of workers you want to execute. So for serial execution, at least 1 worker should be there. So I'm just adding 1 here. Okay. So I have configured this for serial execution. So how we can make it as so sorry, just a second. So parallel, we have make it comment, and at least 1 worker should be there for serial execution. For parallel execution, you can have a number of workers. Now we go back and see. So if we're currently in which mode it is executing, because we have commented the parallel one. So 5 tests, 1 worker is assigned, 5 tests are executing, and again, they are executing in the serial mode. They're executing in the serial mode. And by default, it is follow the serial mode, because we have just commented this. We have commented this parallel equal to false. Where is that option? Yeah, here it is commented. So if we commented this option, by default, it will go to in the serial mode itself. Okay. But still, I just enable this option, still fully parallel, okay, equal to true itself. This is the default option. Okay. But I want to control this. I want to make my tests serial, even though the configuration is parallel here. So then go back here, and here you can add one command. So we need to do some describe configuration, that is test dot describe dot configure. Okay, so test dot describe dot configure. Even if you don't specify the describe block, still this command will work. Okay, so test dot describe dot. So configure. So here we need to pass one option. We need to pass on which mode you want to execute. So I want to execute mode equal to serial, like that. So mode equal to serial. So this command also will make our test serial execution. So if you don't specify this, by default, it will follow for parallel, because in the configuration file, parallel equal to true. So when I say parallel equal to true, how many number of workers will be assigned? Even though we specify number of workers here 1, it won't consider this option. So can just look and execute once again. So 5 tests, still one worker is assigned. We are still executing in the serial mode, but how many workers are assigned? Only one worker assigned. Serial mode is executed, but serial mode only one worker is by default. As I said before, serial mode, one worker is by default. So even though if you are increasing the number of workers, let us say I make it as a 3 workers and save the file. And now again, try to run the test. I have increased the number of workers 3 and serial execution. See, still it is taking one worker. So what does that mean? When I run the test in the serial mode, by default, one worker will be assigned to the all the 5 tests. So it will like only one worker will execute all the tests one by one, one after another. So remember, in the serial mode, by default, one worker will be assigned for test. Once the test is completed, then the same worker will be executed another test. So if I look at this in the serial mode execution, we can make it is false. And whenever you make this option serial here, even in the configuration file, even if you put here true or false, this won't impact because this value we have already overridden. Okay, so this is a test level configuration. So only if you want to run the file tests, the tests which are present in the file in the serial mode, we can configure this option. This is serial execution. Okay, now let us see the parallel execution. So again, go back to the config file. So parallel execution also we can do through configuration file and a test file. So as we already know, if you want to make it parallel, you can say fully parallel equal to true. So when you make parallel equal to true, how many workers will be allocated for the tests? It is depending on the number of tests. So currently, how many tests we have in this? We have 5 tests. So by default, 5 workers will be allocated. So in the parallel testing, so the number of workers will not be considered. So number of workers by default, if I say 5 tests, 5 workers will be automatically allocated. Suppose, let me comment this workers. So I have just enabled fully parallel equal to true. Now again, go back to the parallel tests. Right, so I comment this statement for now. So in which mode it will execute now? In the parallel mode, right? Fully parallel equal to true. And I have not specified number of workers also. So by default, it will allocate 5 workers because we have a 5 test. And which mode it will execute? In the parallel mode it will execute. So npx playwright test parallel testing. Now just observe. So 5 tests and 5 workers. And you can see it is again executed in the parallel mode. So that's the reason we can see in the random order. So 5 tests and 5 workers by default allocated. And now the parallel testing also we can achieve by using this command, a specific test files if you want to execute parallel without depending on this configuration file, we can do that. So I just comment here fully parallel to, even though if you specify this, that is overridden, not a problem. So I just commented this. Now here I will add one statement for parallel testing. So I can say test.describe.configure mode equal to parallel. Mode equal to parallel. So this command will make all our tests inside the file or parallel. Now, how many workers it will be allocated now? So how many workers it will be allocated? So by default, 5 tests we have. So 5 workers will be allocated. So now I can just run it. By default, 5 workers will be allocated. So even it is a serial execution or parallel execution, we can configure from the config file. We can make this true or false. The another way is we can also configure specific tests which are present inside the file. We can make it as a serial or parallel by specifying these options. So these are the options. Test.describe.configure more serial, test.describe.configure more parallel. Okay. Now, so let me show you another thing. So I just commented both and go back to the test and enabling fully parallel. So as I said, if you are running serial mode, by default, worker will be 1. So we cannot increase it, we cannot decrease it. But in the parallel mode, by default, how many workers will be allocated? In the parallel mode, depends on the number of tests. So depends on the number of tests, workers will be allocated. But if you want to configure the number of workers, let's say I want to use only, I have 5 tests, but I want to use only 3 workers, or I want to use only 2 workers. So that we can configure. So how we can configure here? We can configure like this. So by default, I have 5 tests, 5 workers are allocating, but I want to make it as a 3. So now I say workers 3 in the configuration file I set here. Now if I go back and execute, so this will take 3 workers. So by default, 5 tests I have. Previously, we have assigned 5 workers for 5 tests. Now, once you done the configuration, now we can see 5 tests are executed by 3 workers. So this value is also configurable. So by default, 5 tests and 5 workers, if you don't specify this configuration. But if you want to do this configuration, you can increase and decrease the number of workers. Up to which number we can increase the number of workers? Maximum depends on the number of tests. Suppose I have only 5 tests. Now I put number of workers are 6. Then what will happen? So I have only 5 tests, but I put number of workers is equal to 6. So if I look at this, it will still take only 5 workers. It will still take only 5 workers because the number of tests are only 5. So it will take maximum number of workers are 5 or below the 5, but it won't be more than 5. Okay, so remember this. So this is configurable. So I say number of workers equal to 2. So again, 2 workers are assigned to the 5 different tests. 5 different tests are running by 2 workers. Okay, so this is a configuration. We can do that. And one more option we have in the parallel. So for example, let's say in my test, currently on which browser my tests are executing? On Chrome browser. So if I go back to the configuration file where the browser is configured under the projects, my Chromium browser is configured. And apart from this, Firefox WebKit is also configured. So now my requirement is I want to run my test parallel only on the Chromium browser, or I want to run my test parallel only on the Firefox browser, but in other browsers, I want to go with the normal execution. Only specific browser I want to configure parallel. Okay, so then how we can happen it? So what I will do is I will make this fully parallel comment. Means if I make fully parallel comment means true means, okay, so fully parallel, I just commented means it will follow serial execution by default. But I want to execute my test parallel if I'm using Chromium browser or if I'm using Firefox browser. Then we can also make it happen specific to browser. So to do this, the whatever option we have commented, so fully parallel true, just to have that option inside the project. So inside the Chromium, I put this option. So when I put this option fully parallel equal to true, then only the tests which are running on the Chromium will be executed parallel and other tests will be executed in the serial mode. Okay, now just observe. So I just fully parallel equal to true only on the Chromium browser. So now let me run the test. So will it go parallel or not? Chromium, we are by default running in the Chromium only, right? So when I run the test, so 5 tests, 2 workers are assigned. So by default, it will go to parallel mode. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 2 workers means it is executed in the parallel mode. Every time you won't see the same order, guys. So if you run the parallel test, every time you won't see the same order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let me try to increase the number of workers. So as of now, only 2 is there. So let me make it as 5. And now say this. Just a second. Okay, so now 5 tests, 5 workers. Now you can see the order is different. So 1, 2, 4, 3, 5. So parallel testing is working fine. But because we have run the test only on the Chromium browser, so the parallel is applying here, right? Now, if you want to run in some other browser, it should not work like that. Okay, some other browser means I just want to run in the Firefox browser. So how to run in Firefox browser? So to run the test in the Firefox browser, we need to enable this. Go to the projects, enable this. Okay, so when I enable this, what will happen? Now my test will run on both the Chromium as well as in the Chromium as well as on the Firefox. So both the browser will be considered, but I will comment Chrome browser this time. I'm commenting Chromium browser. I just enable only Firefox browser, but on which browser my test will be executed? Okay, so let it be there from now because we fully palette true only we put in the Chromium. Okay, so now I have a Chromium browser enabled. I have a Firefox browser also enabled. So when you run my test, by default, all my tests will be executed on the Chromium browser as well as a Firefox browser in the both the browsers. But I want to execute them only on the Chromium, or I want to execute them only on the Firefox. Then how we can make it happen? We can pass one parameter here. Hyphen hyphen project space. Here if you provide Chromium, then it will execute on the Chromium browser. So when I run the Chromium browser, will it execute parallel or not? Yes. So that will execute in the parallel mode. Now when I run this, because in the only Chromium I have set up the parallel mode. So in the parallel mode executed, 5 workers are allocated. Now the same command I'm just running into Firefox, so hyphen hyphen project Firefox. So when I execute this, because we have not specified parallel on the Firefox browser, so it is executing in the serial mode. You can see only one worker is assigned because it is a serial mode execution. So parallel mode execution, we can also configure at the browser specific. So here fully parallel equal to true in the Chromium browser. So whenever I run the test in the Chromium browser, they are executing in the parallel mode. And whenever I run the test in the Firefox mode, they are executing the serial mode. So these are the different configurations we can do. So parallel mode and the serial mode. Okay. And for example, let's say I'm commenting this for now and also comment the Firefox. Okay. Now again, come back to the Chromium browser. I just disable fully parallel equal to true. And here I defined again fully parallel equal to true for all the tests. So by default, how many workers I have assigned here? Let's say 5 and I make it as a true, for example. Now, when you run this, I enable parallel now. So it will run all 5 tests parallel with workers 2. Okay, this is configured in the configuration file. So workers we configured in the configuration file. And the number of workers we can also specify at the runtime. So for example, let's say I'm running the test here. So by default, how many workers we configure in the config file that will be taken. But if you want to configure your own number of workers, here you can pass one parameter hyphen workers space, and here you can provide, let's say I'm providing 4 workers. Now in the configuration file, even though we specify number of workers 2, this will take 4 now. So 5 tests, 4 workers. Now you can see 5 tests and 4 workers and parallel execution. And similarly, you can also keep is equal to. So instead of giving space, you can also give equal to 4. That is also working fine. So now 5 tests, 4 workers are allocated. So the number of workers you can allocate at the runtime when you run your tests. Or we can also configure in the configuration file. Okay. So this is all about parallel testing. So these are the different options which are available in the parallel testing. Okay. So for example, let's say I make it fully parallel true and number of workers, I make it as a 1. Now you tell me, will it execute in parallel mode and serial mode? Will it execute in the parallel mode or serial mode? I just put fully parallel true, but number of workers only 1. Number of workers only 1. It will execute in serial mode. Okay, so to enable serial mode, you can make worker is equal to 1. So you don't need to specify serial or parallel anywhere. So even though fully parallel equal to true, whenever you assign only one worker cannot execute all the tests at the same time, right? So if I assign only one worker, the one worker execute one test only one time. After completion, it will take another test. So by default, whenever you assign worker 1, it will execute in serial mode, even though if you specify true here. Okay, that is a one important point. So now when I run this again, I'm removing the number of workers here. And by default, number of workers is 1, 5 tests. Now you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the serial mode, it is executed. In the serial mode, it is executed. Okay. Now, number of workers, I will pass through command prompt this time. So hyphen workers, hyphen workers, I say 1. Again, it will go to serial mode because one worker cannot execute all the 5 tests in parallel mode. Okay, so these are the different options are available for running test in parallel mode. Okay, understood everyone? So this is all about parallel execution. This is all about parallel execution. Okay, parallel and serial. So depends upon our scenario, we can make them parallel or serial, and we can also make them parallel specific to the browser. I want to run my test parallel only on the Chrome browser, but other browser I don't want. So then you can use this option inside the browser. And this browser also we can pass through command prompt by using hyphen project option. Hyphen project Chromium, hyphen project Firefox, or hyphen project WebKit. So these are the different options which we have to run the test parallel. Okay, fine. This is all about parallel testing.